when we put together the initial chat, we actually say we want to make this a fun experience, put some memes in the chat, have a bit of fun, And at the end of it, what they say is, with you guys, we felt like you were good people and you not only had our backs on a professional level, but on a personal level, you were great to deal with. And the whole process was actually enjoyable.
Our motto is buy without regrets. And so
if you can buy a property that will serve you for 10 years as opposed to 3 years, that will serve you well. And something.
Buying a great property today, that's not just what it's about. It's also getting something that could be ripe for improvement when the time is right for that investor or for the next buyer.
You think about, lifestyle, what's important to you? How do you get to work? What do you need for your family? What amenities like parks and shops? Then you look at the budget.
Welcome to Street Secrets. I'm Chris Bates. I'm a mortgage broker since 2013. And in this podcast, we're going to be interviewing Australia's leading buyer's agents, ones with decades of experience, have the local insider knowledge on the street, and can really help you with your buying process, no matter whether you're a first home buyer, upgrader, investor. In this podcast, you'll get access to Australia's leading buyer's agents' minds every week on a Thursday. What's the word on the street? Welcome to Street Secrets. I'm Chris Bates in the studio today with Andrew Hancock. I've known Andrew for some time. He's a local specialist buyer's agent in the Sutherland Shire, a real fast-growing part of Sydney and a great place to live. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me, Chris. I really appreciate it.
Andrew, obviously we've known each other for some time, but people listening to this may not. I mean, you've been a buyer's agent for some time as well. I mean, and can you give us a bit of an understanding of sort of what you're doing prior? I always think it's a really interesting conversation and what got you started.
Sure, no problem. So my involvement in property started over 20 years ago. Bought my first investment property. I had been sort of reading about investment and property as a growth or as a financial tool for many years and didn't have the capacity to do it. And when I started very aggressively. So I was buying sort of 1 and 2 a year for many years at the time. And my background is actually airline pilot. So I came from an airline background, which is very heavily regulated, very professional industry. And obviously, once we started the business, one of the things we started to integrate into it was checklist procedures, making sure we could build in some of the past experience into buying property. And it was very successful. We had a rent roll and we proceduralized and checklisted a lot of what we did. And we tried to bring a bit more professionalism to an industry that unfortunately often lacks it, especially in the regulatory arena as well. So I was flying for many years, still do a bit of flying here and there, but my property background, we build it up through a rent roll and advisory, investment planning, direct acquisition, and ultimately now we specialise in buyer's agency in and only in and around the Sutherland Shire and southern suburbs of Sydney.
I don't think we'll have too many pilots turned buyer's agents on this podcast. I mean, it's probably a unique way into the industry, but I do think every way into a buyer's agency does have some sort of learnings that they've come. I mean, what's some of you obviously talk about regulatory and following a process and procedure, and what's some of the other things you think from your brain as a pilot and your experience there sort of helps you as a buyer's agent?
So a couple of key things come to mind. Firstly, I think buying a property is like an art and a science. So too many people get bogged down in either hard numbers or they lose sight of, the emotional side of things when it comes to what future buyers may want, say in the investment space. So a big part of our job is to take both segments, and obviously with the numbers and the logical and scientific side of it, that's very easy for myself and for us as a company based on how we've built it, because we had put a lot of checklists and procedures in place where, just like in a flight deck or in a cockpit, where things are checked and checked over to make sure things aren't being missed, we did the same thing. And when we're buying a property for someone, whether it's a home or an investment property, we actually have a high level due diligence checklist that we run prior to even bothering to inspect a property. And so we're big believers in checklists and procedures, and we proceduralize pretty much every aspect of that, whilst obviously having to take into account the emotional aspect of buying property. Too many investors, I think, particularly focus too heavily on the numbers, and too many home buyers don't consider the scientific side of things either. So what we do is try to strike a balance, and my background in aviation and being an airline pilot, it obviously enables that to come in probably a bit easier than most.
Yeah, no, I do think you're absolutely right. When you are doing due diligence, not just before you see a property, but when you start getting keen and you start considering, is this a viable option, and then obviously you get through stage 1 and there's obviously stage 2 and there's stage 3 and, the there's a lot of things you need to think about that, and particularly when you're emotional, when you've sort of found the property you love, your brain isn't really your friend, right? It starts to self-sabotage. It starts to, not wanting to look under the sort of carpet because you don't want to not fall in love with this property. And I think following, taking the brain out of that emotional state and just following a buyer's agent, it's one of the big things I think buyer's agents do really, that really ones with a lot of experience is allowed to, no, I know you're keen, but let's go through a process. Let's really just make sure this is the right fit. And you have to often do that quite fast. I mean, you're a specialist in the sort of Sutherland Shire. Can you give us a bit of an understanding of, why you're sort of on that pocket? Did you grow up there, and how's it sort of shifting over the years since you started?
Right. So I didn't grow up here. I spent a lot of time throughout my university years down in the Sutherland Shire. I had a lot of friends from university and used to be here sort of every second weekend. And so we moved down here quite a number of years ago. But I sort of spent time in different areas of Sydney. And ironically, the reason we ended up down in the Shire is the same reason why probably 90% of our clients are in the same boat, which was looking for better value in Sydney. So we've got a pretty good proximity to the coast. We've got a train line, a very good family-friendly vibe. And most of our clients are from the inner west, lower north shore, eastern suburbs, looking for that value. And it's still, I think, I try not to be biased, but in terms of broader Sydney terms, in terms of where the price points are sitting and the value you're getting for those price points and proximity to amenities in the city and transport, etc., it still holds some of the best value in Sydney. And I think people recognize that. So when we say we're specialists down in the Sutherland Shire, we know that the vast bulk of our clients are coming from out of area. We have many in-area clients too, but people are still recognizing that value. And we recognize that when we moved down here, we actually used to live on the Balmoral slopes there at Balmoral and had an apartment, had a growing family, and we just saw better value down here. So we specialize down here, and I think a lot of people are still continuing to see that value because, our price point for a freestanding house is sort of anywhere from 1.5 to 2.5, call it. And particularly once you click over just over 2 million, you're now getting 3-4 bedrooms, freestanding, great suburb, maybe 10, 15 minutes to a train, swimming pool, it's things that you're not really going to get anywhere in Sydney if you want to be close to the coast and still relatively close to the city.
Yeah, you made some good points, right? I think, the Sutherland Shire does have it's really shifted. I think if I sort of reflect on early days as a sort of mortgage broker, and a lot of people would say, oh, I don't really want to go down there. I want to be really close to the city. And, people were sort of not that brave to sort of adventure. But I think that once you start people looking at the Sutherland Shire, they go, hang on a sec, it's got a train line. It's got beaches. It's got, a real family sort of community feel to it. I can get to the city. I can get to the airport. I think that's a huge benefit of being on the south side. And I think that a lot of people think, hang on a sec, this is actually really good value for money. And while it's performed quite well, particularly over that sort of last 5 years, so have other parts of Sydney. So it's still got that sort of affordability metric. I mean, you talk about a lot of, couples and families sort of moving to the Shire. Is there any other demographics, or what are some of the things that sort of drive that market?
Yeah, so we have quite a few downsizers, funnily enough. They sell, in fact, we had one not too long ago from up your way selling, Northern Beaches, and they wanted to find a place close to a train in a safe suburb, and they were looking for a place, and the budget was relatively limited in the scheme of things. And so we get quite a few downsizers, funnily enough, coming down here. They want to be close to a train line, but they want to feel safe and be in, some good suburbs that are the way they can walk to the train and feel quite good about it. We also find that Cronulla itself is like a mini Manly. It's very similar for people who haven't been to Cronulla but have been to Manly. It's kind of got the mall there, which is similar to the Corso in Manly. It's got the beach at the end. It's got very similar vibes. And so from a value point of view, we get a lot of first home buyers who may have been renting in and around Manly, buying into Cronulla, the Cronulla apartment market. The 5% deposit scheme by the Labor government's definitely pushed prices up already, but it wasn't too long ago, and it's still around $1 million for a 2-bedroom apartment, give or take, in Cronulla, and you'll be a 5-minute walk to the beach for that price. So that's probably another real key demographic we see, is the younger buyers looking for their first homes. And so we get the upsizers, we get the downsizers, and we get the first home buyers, but the value is there across the board, to be honest with you.
Yeah, it's an interesting one around the downsides. It makes sense, right? It's a great place to live in terms of access to national parks, access to water, access to the city, an easy way of life. And it's, commutable to other parts of the city. So if your kids and your grandkids are sort of living in other parts, it's not like you're too far away. And I think you're absolutely right. Cronulla is like little Manly down there and, is going through a lot of gentrification. I mean, the Sutherland Shire does have a bit of gentrification going on. There is a bit of density coming and I think, but there's also got some real challenges to that as well. I mean, you've got a lot of waterways, a lot of restrictions in terms of, roads getting over those waterways to the city. And so, that's going to put a bit of a cap. Obviously, you've got the train that changes things, but what are some of the challenges, I guess, where people are new to the area? Because a lot of people are, particularly in the family market, where they just don't understand the local market enough and potentially head down the wrong direction.
Yeah, so I would say one of the key challenges, and just touching on Cronulla, is the development on the South Cronulla Peninsula has been almost out of control. So the road structure in South Cronulla Peninsula, if you were to look on a map, has simply not improved. There's no more room to put any roads, but the amount of apartments going in, and we're now starting to see people who are almost preferencing the North Cronulla section just to avoid the traffic and the busyness of that. In terms of connectivity to the city, you've got Tom Oakley's Bridge and the Tarrant Point Bridge, which are really the two main two main roads up towards the north section there. And then you've got the train. And now there's a section of land called the F6 reserve land, which has been reserved since about the 50s. And the state government has now built the road to President Avenue in Cogra, and they've actually extended the motorway to that section. Now, there are plans for that to extend right down through across the waterway there and down through Sylvania and onto the south. Hasn't been funded yet, maybe will not for many years, but if they build that road, that will be a real, sort of connection to the north. At the moment, what that means is there's a stigma about the land that has been reserved there too. So that's a real point of local knowledge where people from out of area need to be very careful about buying in or very near to that road, to that land that has been reserved, despite the fact we know it's more than likely going to go underground, and we know that for various reasons, which I can touch on if you like. There is a stigma about properties on or very close to that land because theoretically they could build a freeway across it. And so that's one thing, a part of local knowledge we have to make clients aware of, that they need to be wary of. But look, overall, in terms of the connectivity, the train line is really the key. A lot of people and a lot of our clients want to be close to the train line, a 10 minutes, 15-minute walk, which it's not different anywhere in Sydney, but there is definitely a price spike in and around those walk distances there, because other than that, you've got two roads up to the north and they can get quite congested at times.
Yeah, I mean, you've highlighted a really interesting point around the F6 sort of freeway. I remember a long time ago, I was jumping on Google Maps, the satellite, and I was tracking the road down the coastline of all the land that, was reserved for the freeway. But you're right. I mean, a high likelihood it's probably going to go underground. But I mean, the only reason that F6, maybe not the only reason, but one of the reasons is that, obviously some issues with sinkholes and, it's taking a lot longer to do the first section of it. But, it's probably inevitable that it will happen at some point. And, that's one of the big pros of the sort of Sutherland Shire, is that at some point it becomes even more commutable than it is. Is that something that, a lot of clients are sort of having a belief in and encouraging them to sort of look at that pocket, because it will have such good connectivity, not just to the north, but to the south? The Sutherland Shire is basically on the doorstep of, the South Coast, which is, an amazing place to sort of visit, not just on weekends, but holidays. And how do people think about that?
They think about it in two ways. We encourage people to think about future infrastructure, obviously, because either how it's going to affect them in a negative way or a positive way. So you want to be close enough where it's going to be, easily accessible if it happens, but obviously not too close. What I would say on that is that we're probably a long way off either buyer in the year 2025. We're probably a good way off anyone having to be either excited about it or concerned about it in the short term. But nevertheless, there is a stigma around it. So that F6 land, I think it's inevitable it's going to happen. I don't think Sydney can continue to cope with the population growth it's got without building future roadways. And because it's already essentially a planned project, it's probably going to happen. In fact, I can tell you that we had a client who was sort of very senior in New South Wales government who went through the plans with me in detail. And we had a look at some of where the road's going to go. And it was basically, the plan was that it's going to go underground. They no longer can afford to acquire the properties above the ground there. So that, despite that being a potential threat, it is, and I stress anecdotally, unlikely to happen. We also know that the roadway down through Sans Souci is probably not going to happen on the land that you can see reserved there on the eastern side of the Sans Souci Peninsula. It's going to go to the western side of Rocky Point Road due to what's underground. But nevertheless, all these things have to come into play when you're considering whether or not to buy somewhere, because if that gets built and when that gets built, it'll be similar to what's happened in the Hills District, where, I grew up in Castle Hill and around Castle Hill, and the time to the city then on the M2 610 bus used to be an hour and a half. And now you can get up there in 35 minutes via the metro or obviously the road structure. It's improved a lot. The same will happen to the Shire. And of course, what will happen then is the value we see now will no longer be the value we see now. You'll start to see prices equalise, probably more so with the closer inner city areas. And look, it'll always probably be a bit cheaper, but one good freeway and, that'll be it. Because what we're already seeing now with people wanting to buy here for the train line and the accessibility and the value, they're going to do that in spades. And so I think Sydney as a whole, we're very bullish on where the Shire sits. And at the very least, it's always going to provide an underlying level of value support compared to other areas in Sydney.
Yeah, you've highlighted a really good case study there around sort of the South Cronulla, around the densification. I mean, the Sutherland Shire with the train line and Chris Min's sort of shift in sort of trying to create more density across the city. It does make sense, with that train line to sort of increase density. I mean, how's that going to also affect the Sutherland Shire, and where are you seeing change, and how are you sort of helping clients think through their briefs with, the shift, I guess, with more density across the whole Sydney?
One of the key changes, obviously, with what you're referring to there, the LMR or the low medium rise housing plan, there's a heat map that has been generated, and most buyers agents would or should be looking at this now as a part of their due diligence to see, where they're buying and if whatever they're buying falls within this new proposed LMR heat map, which is now a little bit beyond proposed. But one of the key changes, obviously, is the size of the block that you're allowed to build a duplex on or a multi-dwelling housing. And we actually have already purchased a couple of properties for people inside of the LMR on a smaller block that previously would not have been allowed to have a duplex put on it under a CDC, but more than likely will be and now is. And so what that's going to do is increase the highest and best value of that land in coming years, where we know that a 600 square metre block with a 15 metre frontage in previous years immediately commanded a premium. And so this new housing policy effectively is bringing in a swathe of lots and land lots that otherwise previously wouldn't have been able to have a duplex on it, or even medium density housing, that are now bringing that into the fold. And so we've been targeting certain lots, flat blocks, good frontages on the new policy, where we say, hey, look, you may not necessarily want to buy it for this reason, but here's a definite value add. And we've actually built into our due diligence reports a section on the LMR where we can say, yeah, this falls inside of that map. Now, to some people, that's a bad thing. To some people, they don't care about that. They don't want to be surrounded by apartments or medium density or whatnot. But we do know that some people in future years say, well, if my lot can be sold for a premium to a developer, then I want to factor that in. And already we're getting developers who are a little bit gun shy of the new policy and now starting to snap up those lots at a premium. So look, Cronulla is obviously ripe for it, and there's various other aspects or areas of the Shire which do and don't have it. I think it's going to be a good thing in some ways, but provided, as always, the infrastructure keeps up to some degree, then I think it'll be a good thing. One point I will make, we actually saw a DA recently it was a townhouse development. Believe it or not, it had no parking spots. It was a 5-lot townhouse development. It had no parking for the residents. None. And that was inside the LMR, and it looks like that's going to be approved because it's inside the LMR and walkable to the train station. So it's a fascinating change in thinking by councils particularly, and I would assume the state government, in that people are going to rely on cars less and less because someone's going to have to put those cars somewhere if even any of those residents have them. So look, it's a fascinating one, but it's going to probably create parking issues and whatnot, and as we all know, Sydney's bad enough in that regard. But it was probably the first one we've seen due to the LMR that had no parking in the development.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big topic in itself, whether that should be getting approved or not. But if you think about the Shire, obviously people just follow that train line, but is there value in also exploring a little bit further to the west and sort of maybe a bit, the Bengal and other parts of the Shire, and whether it's an affordability benefit, whether it means to get a better house and maybe the train doesn't matter to them? How do you sort of deal with that? Because I imagine it's a common sort of challenge you have to deal with clients.
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of people have a preconceived notion of where they need to be in almost physical proximity to a train station. We like to quantify it more in terms of time. When people say, I want to be a walk to a station, we say, well, can you be a drive to a station? If the answer is yes, then we immediately can bring in that western part, west of the Warrenora Bridge, Bangor, Menai, potentially even up to Illawong. There's a point in that section where Menai is, where it's an equally distant travel time to Padstow Station as it is to Sutherland Station, which is not too dissimilar. So people often buy in the northern section of Alfred's Point, and they can be a pretty short distance to Padstow Station, and it's only about a sort of a 5 to 10 minute drive maximum from most parts of that western section. And so we actually bought for a client recently from the inner west, sold in Rozelle, and decided they wanted a bigger house, and we found them great off market in Western Menai, backed onto the bush, which is exactly what they wanted. There's no neighbours, big house with the pool, 5-bedroom, and we bought a pre-market for $2,050,000. So that was a great buy, and they were super happy because he can drive straight up Elephants Point Road, and they can either go to the station there or they can just join the M5 and actually be a pretty good drive distance to the CBD if they need it as well. So there's a lot of good proximity depending where you are and what you want to do. Equal to that, people talk about the beach, and I live in Grays Point, right up the end on the peninsula there. Now, the distance for us from Grays Point, if you were to look at a map in terms of time, so I shouldn't say distance, the time travel from Grays Point to the beach at Cronulla is almost the same as from Engadine. And people have a sort of perception about Engadine saying, oh, look, it's maybe a little bit far and whatnot. But one, it's got the train line, you know, very close. It's got its own train station. And two, because of the 80-kilometre-an-hour zone up to President Avenue there, you can get to the beach in almost the same time as from some of the other suburbs that are perceived to be closer. And the price point's a good $500,000 less, give or take. And so there's very good value in that sort of Engadine, south of Sutherland pocket, down the train line there for buyers who maybe don't have quite the budget for a freestanding house in some of the eastern parts of the Shire.
Yeah, you've taken the question out of my sort of mouth there. I mean, I was going to explore, you know, do people sort of come down and look at sort of that south sort of, you know, north of sort of Wollongong and sort of along that train line? I mean, it makes sense, I think, for a lot of people to, you know, who would like that type of lifestyle. You might like that sort of leafy, access to national parks, access to the south coast, and yeah, and just sort of reframing their thinking. I think we've absolutely seen that with clients. I mean, with the Shire region, I mean, obviously we're talking about access to nature. I mean, what are some of the other things that really drive that market? I mean, I think a lot of people who grew up on the Shire want to stay on the Shire. The families don't want to leave. Like, there's a real low. You look at some of the reports, some of the lowest turnover suburbs are in the Shire. People just never leave. I mean, how do you think that also affects prices?
Yeah, so for example, Yowie Bay is consistently in one of the most tightly held suburbs in Sydney. I think the average hold time is around 26 years in Yowie Bay specifically. And that obviously puts a real price support under, you know, where we see those sorts of properties. So Yowie Bay recently, you know, we just saw an outrageous result. There were so many people at the auction. And so that hold time definitely makes a difference. People in the Shire tend to stay in the Shire. I think everyone in Sydney knows, you know, it's called the Shire, despite there being multiple Shires around Sydney, technically. And I think that's creating a price support there where people turn over. You know, the equity churn in the Shire is obviously once people get here, they tend not to leave. There is also a concept called the Shire tax, where things are theoretically a little more expensive if you live in the Shire to some degree. The access to nature is a big one. You know, we've got the national park. As I mentioned, I live in Grace Point. We literally have deer, bucks with giant horns roaming the streets here, which not a lot of people would know. They come a lot, you know, so there's a lot of nature. The Port Hacking there is a beautiful waterway. Jet skis are permitted, which they're not in many, you know, obviously some of the other waterways, particularly Sydney Harbour. And the national park is just there. You can drive down to Gary Beach and have some of those really nice remote coastal beaches, and people just have access to them within sort of half an hour.
We've sort of definitely highlighted the pros of living in the Sutherland Shire. And I mean, I absolutely have seen many clients over the year, you know, I not only work with yourself, but also just have moved down to that region, absolutely love it. And particularly people from, you know, lots of countries in Europe who, you know, maybe can't afford to buy in other areas, have no sort of tie to any area. And I think that together with people from the Shire wanting to live with the Shire, and I do think people who, you know, have got families there and they're having kids are sort of with the densification are probably more confident than other parts of the city that go, well, yeah, I still think there's going to be a way that the kids can sort of stay here. And I think that's definitely going to, you know, encourage people to want to move there. But obviously it affects people who have, you know, got properties that are, you know, potentially not in the dream zones or parts of the suburbs. So I think you need to be across that. Obviously, you've been a buyer's agent down there for some time. I mean, there's not many buyer's agents down the sort of Sutherland Shire. I think it's a good pocket to pick if I was running a buyer's agency. How does it sort of been working with agents, and how important are their relationships, and how do you maintain and grow them?
Yeah. So obviously, people perceive a buyer's agent in general as finding me a property. Frankly, finding the property is probably one of the easier parts and one of the misconceptions of what we do. I guess when it comes to agents and agent relationships, we build those relationships over time. People often say, well, how do you find being a buyer's agent? And I would say it's a real good exercise in politics. It's almost a political role. You have to make everyone happy whilst advocating for your client and working for your client, but keeping on the good side of agents, but banging heads with them when you need to, but keeping it so that next time they're going to, send you a property or deal with you in a positive, constructive negotiation on the next one. I think too many buyers agents really flex up. We hear stories, people walking in and tearing down properties in front of other buyers to try and seem like they know what they're talking about. That's just not how we do business. It's not how any good buyers agent should do business. And particularly in the Shire, it's such a closed quarters when it comes to the markets, the various markets and the agent pool. We are literally physically separated from the rest of Sydney by that waterway. And so people tend to very much specialize in certain areas. So our aim over time is to build those relationships with the agents in a genuine way, not just say that, but, we'll have coffee with the agents. We've got them all on obviously a list, but we'll make calls to them and chat with them, and they'll call us for guidance as well, funnily enough. When you're doing a good job with agents when they're calling you for advice. What do you think this property's worth? Hey, I've got this one coming up. I'd just love to get your opinion on it. Even if it's just to do a walkthrough unofficially to get some guidance on where it may be. So we've probably got a number of key agents we work with regularly, and then obviously the ones who do a little bit lower volume that we touch base with. Fortunately for us, Curtis in our office is an ex-sales agent in the Shire and built a lot of good relationships himself, which has enhanced our offering, which he's come from a different segment, obviously, of the industry, but he's very well liked, had a very good reputation as a sales agent. And when he changed teams, as a buyer's agent's team now, we've got a very strong, I guess, reputation in and around the Shire. When it comes to other buyer's agents, look, there's not as many as there are in other parts of Sydney. And I think that's obviously the perception is not as many people use them down here. That is true in the sense I mentioned where the local buyers using them, but we do get many out of area buyers agents. So there is some competition. They're really only sort of one-man bands, and whereas we've got a team of 4. And we believe the strength in what we're doing is, one, the depth of that experience and the breadth of that experience, but also the longevity and the relationships, both with what we've built and with Curtis on board. And we're continuing to grow. We're looking for another one. But I think it's imperative that you have a good team around you as well, not just sort of a single buyer's agent, if possible, just because everyone needs a holiday, everyone gets sick, and you want to make sure your search goes on. So look, we're probably the biggest, we are the biggest down here and the most active, that's for sure. And we get that feedback from agents quite regularly as well, that, you guys are doing the most and you're doing it the best, which sounds a little arrogant, but the agents are the ones who are dealing with all of them, and they deal with out of areas as well. And I think, that mutual respect and the volume and that ongoing relationship with those agents, it benefits us and it benefits our clients, obviously, in a way that it probably wouldn't if we weren't area specialists.
Yeah, I think you've answered that really well, Andrew. I do think, it's one of those evolutions as a buyer's agent. You start out and you're trying to figure it out and you knuckle down and you start to get some runs on the board, but you've got to keep investing. I do think you need to build a bit of a team around you, just because there's a lot of work that, has to be done, not just finding, researching and maintaining relationships and due diligence and negotiation, etc. And I do think the best buyers agencies do sort of share that workload, and, allows them to sort of uncover new opportunities or potentially consider options faster if, you're not, running, on fumes basically. And you're right, having a break or getting sick. I do think you're right as well, that maintaining those relationships and, doing what you say you're going to do. And I guess being their sort of buyer's agency over years builds trust with those agents. And we know what, it's not an out area buyer's agent I'm never going to see again. I know they've got a great client and they're not going to play games and they're going to, not going to fall over on me. I think that takes time. And I think the only way to do that is actually stay in a market and really sort of deliver time and time again. I mean, what's some of the intangible things do you think, though, where you mentioned there what people believe are value of buyer's agents and, what they actually get value on? What are some of the intangible things you think when the end of the journey, the client reflects back and says, so glad we engaged Andrew and the team. They really helped us with this issue.
One of the key feedback points we get at the end of the process from clients, and this is probably not one a lot of people think about, is how they feel emotionally about the experience. They're obviously happy they bought a property, but we try to make it less business-like and less transactional and actually a fun process. And when we put together, most buyer's agents, we use some form of group communication with their team and the client. When we put together the initial chat, and we use WhatsApp for that broadly, we actually say we want to make this a fun experience, put some memes in the chat, have a bit of fun, and at the end of it, what they say is, not only was that not stressful and not a total burnout, but it was actually quite fun. We had a good time. And with you guys, we felt like you were good people, and you not only had our backs on a professional level, but on a personal level, you were great to deal with. And the whole process was actually enjoyable, which that's probably one of the things we'd be most proud of. We could go through a whole bunch of technical intangibles about, how we negotiated better and we got them a better price. We do that very well. We do all that. Any good buyer's agent who's worth their salt should not be walking in there saying, my client's got $2 million, I'll give you that. They should be fighting for it. And a lot of buyer's agents will do that. A lot of buyer's agents will blow it up. But one of the things I think we are proud of is that we have ultimately become friends with a lot of previous clients, and we'll still go around for barbecues, or, they'll text us for advice. I was just before this podcast, I was, chatting with someone who we bought for a year and a half ago. She was asking me for just some general advice because we're helpful and we do the right thing and we're friendly about it. And at the end of it, they've had a good experience, not only on a property level, but on a personal level. It's fun and with jokes. And that's a really good thing, because they walk away from one of the most stressful things people can go through in their life, which is buying property. It's right up there on the scale of, divorce and death and those bad things. And they say, you know what? That was great. We had a good time, and we're going to miss the chats. We're going to miss the phone calls and miss those messages. So I think that's an intangible that sometimes gets forgotten. It doesn't have to be, a stressful experience, and you can get a good result whilst having a bit of fun. So I don't know if that answers your question, Chris, but, without sort of going to all the normal things a buyer's agent would say per se, that's one thing we're definitely proud of and we do very well.
Oh, I think you've answered it perfectly, to be honest. And I think absolutely it's such a stressful process when you are going it alone, particularly, when one partner sort of does do a lot of the heavy lifting, whether it's just they've got a passion for it, whether they just play that role in the couple, or the other person doesn't have a passion for it, doesn't want to be involved. There's a lot going on there. And I think that independent third party gives a voice for both parties to sort of come along the journey, debate properties, that sounding board, and if you can do it with a bit of fun, because it is stressful, and sort of challenge their thinking, I think that working relationship gets a much better result. When I've written some pockets of when we refer to buyer's agent, we refer multiple, because there are multiple good ones. And one of the reasons we do that is I don't think every buyer's agent fits every personality. And I think if you get that right, you do gel. And I think you've got that a high level of trust and willing to be yourself with the buyer's agent, you get a better result, because they can challenge you. They can sort of see where maybe you're self-sabotaging yourself, and you end up don't just, making the transaction happy because you don't want to work with that person anymore. And I've seen that happen as well. And so I love that answer, to be honest, because I do think it highlights there is a relationship that you form through going through the process. We do it the same as, as brokers and with our clients. And, I think that's, you're making it fun and enjoyable, even though it can be stressful, is a huge value add going through some of the most stressful times. Andrew, I think anyone buying on the Sutherland Shire, you can see today that you've been in safe hands working with the team. And thank you for working with our clients, and really enjoyed the chat today.
Thanks so much, Chris. Really appreciate you having us on. And we'll look forward to chatting ongoing, of course. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much for listening today. We hope you got lots of value out of it. If you'd like to speak to our guest today, there's links in the show notes on how you can get in contact. And if you're buying your first home, upgrading, renovating, or need any finance related queries, obviously we'd love to help. There's links in the show notes to us as a mortgage broker, and we look forward to next week's episode.